Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion topic video. This one is just going to be one of these kind of update, kind of vlog style videos that I tend to do every so often, where I just kind of discuss the state of the Avatar franchise, because I think we're heading into a pretty interesting couple of months coming up as we enter, of course, convention season, plus the build up to a couple of books coming out, a bunch of books actually coming out with The Rise of Kyoshi. Then once we get to October, we have Imbalance Part 3, Team Avatar Tales, Runes of the Empire Part 2. We're going to be, I suppose, finding out some details about Runes of the Empire Part 3 when the cover and description get revealed. And then, I suppose, as we enter convention season, I suppose more New York Comic Con than SDCC, we're going to start to get the news about what's coming next for Avatar Comics, because I suppose first up, they are going to need to announce what is coming next for Avatar Comics, because we're heading into a Part 3. A lot of the times in the past, we'd usually get the announcement at some point between the second and the third part. It only happened differently last time because they did take a little bit of a break between North and South and Imbalance as they set up the new creative team. I hope that doesn't happen here, because now is the time you need to get that flow going. It's actually been really cool to have the Korra and Avatar books with their separate teams be able to kind of, you know, have their releases at the same time. Admittedly, I wish they'd spread them out a little bit more rather than packing them all into the same window every single time. But it is fun to have multiple books basically on the go at the same time. So I think, you know, it's just, I want to speculate a little bit about some of that stuff. Not so much speculate about what's going to happen in like Imbalance Part 3 or Runes of the Empire Part 2, because I already have videos where I gave my full thoughts on them. So if you want to hear some speculation on Runes of the Empire Part 2, the next Runes part, and then Imbalance Part 3, I have two separate videos covering them linked in the description if you want to check them out. So I'll discuss the other stuff basically. So, I suppose immediately up next, the next big thing, Rise of Kyoshi, the first proper Avatar novel coming out 16th of July, not too far away at all. So that is great. Like, it's like 3 weeks away. I'm super excited for it. It's obviously been released a little bit early in some parts of Canada. And the early reviews from people who have got it, it seems like it's amazing. Huge praise being kind of lavished on it, and that's really, really good to hear. And I'm super excited to read it. I'll have a ton of content on that book when it comes out, because it sounds like there is a lot to get into. So I think that will definitely get people excited. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how a novel goes down within the fandom, because a lot of the times the comics tend to come out, the hardcore comic fan community reads it, but it doesn't, very few of the comics ever properly like take off and get the entire fandom talking. So I'm interested to see if this novel gets any bigger of a reaction. Will more people then read the comics, you know, try this out? Or will less people try it out because it is a full-on, you know, 400-plus page novel? Will people who maybe aren't as into, you know, reading novels, you know, struggle to check this one out with no, like, audiobook announced or anything like that? That's something that's going to be interesting to see. Like, will there be more of an appeal for the novel or less of an appeal because it is, you know, it's even less visual than the comics? So that's something that interests me. I'm, of course, super interested in it. I know I'm going to get through that book super, super quick, because it's going to have the depth of information that I've been looking for, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be really light on content, and that's exactly what I've been looking for. So novels are going to open the door for a lot of stuff. Like, we know there's a second Rise of Kyoshi novel called The Shadow of Kyoshi, and that it's a two-parter. But what after that? I assume I assume the pre-orders are already pretty amazing for the book, and it will sell well once it's out, and I think it will build hype towards the second book, so I think they will both do very well. And then immediately the question will be, what next for Avatar novels? And I think people will immediately want them to do something like that. I've been speculating since the novels were first announced that I think this is the perfect place to tell the full Iroh backstory. If it involves a lot of kind of tragedy and maybe some darker moments with, Iroh and Ozai's past, as well as whatever happened with Liu 10, plus some other stuff, then the novel seems like the way to tell that, because the early reviews have also said about this novel, and we saw it from the preview as well, the book doesn't seem to hold back on coming across much, much darker and more intense than even Korra got to. That they're like what in the preview pages that we got, like Kyoshi breaks a guy's nose with her foot, and they seem to just directly note characters getting injured from the fights, blood, bones breaking, and I assume that also means being very, very clear and upfront about death and so on. So that opens the door to tell so many stories that maybe they couldn't tell somewhere else. It also opens the door to potentially, and something I'd like them to do, imagine they just through novels started to tell the story of an Avatar we just knew nothing about. That's always been something I've wanted them to do. Like Kyoshi, obviously we know a little bit about her from the show and other stuff, but primarily they're basing this novel off the excitement of this, off what we know already. But imagine they started to do like something else, like here's a new Avatar, here's the stories of this Avatar from this era. Like imagine they did like the second Avatar, the Avatar after Wan, and just covered their journey. That would be super cool. But the first Rise of Kyoshi novel is just going to open the door to just the ability to tell so many more stories. And as more and more people read it, I think the more excitement will grow as just the potential for stories kind of open up again. Then I suppose we get into, Team Avatar Tales. I should probably talk about that actually before I get into what's next for the comics. This has been such an interesting book to follow over the course of from reveal to all the delays to where we are now. In that, if you saw my reactions to it, it went from being the book I was most excited for. I think in my preview for the merchandise this year, so the video I did at the end of 2018, hyping up the stuff for this year, I said that Team Avatar Tales was the Avatar comic that I was most excited for. It has since gone down to being the book I'm least excited for, and I don't exactly know why. Now maybe it's because the other books have come since then and like we know what they're about, and then this one is just still this enigma in the background. But the more and more I think about it, it's just like, I kind of just want this book to get those reprints. At this point, I'm kind of like, something happened here. Are the stories just bad and they're holding it back? Did they have to redo certain stories because there like wasn't substance to them or anything like that? What happened to this book along the way? I'm at the point now where I went from being like, I think this is exactly what we need, to being like, if this book doesn't have any content, like, I don't know where the excitement is going to come. So I'm very much hoping that the couple of short stories that we haven't heard anything about really deliver, because the few I think we know about are fine, but like there's not a lot to get excited for with the book. I don't really think. Like we saw like Jean Yang's like 2-page story. There's the one with like Toph the Boulder and Boulder's cat, which again I think we pretty much saw in full, and it seems fine, but not particularly impressive. There needs to be, I think, something a little bit more notable here. Otherwise, it's just random stories of the team rather than, here are actually some important stories that we couldn't fit into another story, but works in the short story format. And I think that's what they need to do. Have books that sort of match up well with the books they're reprinting, your Shells, your Sisters, and Rebound. So I'm not sure what to expect, because like to me the talk about this book has just gone down from kind of being like, oh cool, there's also this book coming out, to like no one is talking about this book. There's also just the thing lingering over it of like, it has that weird comic book store release date thing again, where instead of it being released digitally first and then the day after in comic book stores, it's back to being comic book store first, and then 13 days later we get the official proper release of, digitally and so on. I'm hopefully, me with getting a review copy this time, hopefully that won't be too much of a problem, but it still is like going to be a really weird thing that like it's this book that's going to come out in the middle of two other books that release in a different way to that one, and there's been no reason given why this book is being treated differently, and it's just really confusing. Because I think what it's done is that it's really lowered my expectations for those kind of short story collections, whereas I think to some degree, like, those are the type of books that are really needed every so often, because the trilogy format for the comics can get a bit stale sometimes, because the stories all have to be the exact same length. You can only tell a very certain type of story across those 3 books. They're all the same length. There's very little you can do with the like a difference in page count and so on. So those books give the option to tell the other stories, but if they don't tell important stories, then kind of what's the point of them? So I'm hoping that book surprises me, because the problem with it is that, like, we already know what half the content is because it's collecting 3 books in reprint. We've already seen roughly 10 to 12 preview pages. There's only like 30 pages from this book we haven't seen. So they have to deliver. Otherwise the book is just kind of like, you don't have a physical copy of the 3 free comics, then get it here. Which is needed, but you want there to be something in the new content as well. And if this one doesn't do that well, then it doesn't really open the door for like a Korra collection of short stories, which I think would work really well as well. But we'll get into some speculation here about what's next for the comics going forward. So yeah, obviously, like, we have Imbalance Part 3 coming out next, Team Avatar Tales, and Runes Part 2. So like I said, Runes Part 3 is going to have to get solicited at some point. So we're going to have to get the cover, the description, and so on, get our speculation going for Part 3. But after that, we're definitely waiting to see what the announcement is on the books that are coming next. Now, obviously, along the way, there's also going to be Imbalance and Runes of the Empire hardcover collections, the library editions, of course. But given that they don't seem to be doing the annotations anymore, all of a sudden, those books are very much just a kind of editing job type thing. So there's no real extra... Well, the editing is work, of course, but there's no extra like creative stuff that has to go into it. So the creative team's focus is going to be on what's next, and that's where I think they really need to get it right. Because as much as like North and South, I like North and South, and Imbalance has been good so far. They haven't exactly been, I think, the stories that myself or a lot of fans have necessarily wanted the comics to like get to straight away. They've been just very like, okay, they've given us like a couple of things in the background, like Hakoda and Katara's relationship in North and South is really, really well done. Melina's introduction I thought was also well done, but like the plot with like Gilak and stuff like that, Melina's brother, and what they did and then what they didn't do like in the final part, it just kind of came and went, and the only real takeaway was that, like, okay, the South is sort of getting involved in the bigger world picture, but we didn't really see much progress towards that. And then the issue that they set up, they just kind of let be kind of just resolved, and like it wasn't really that big deal. And it feels like the same thing's happening with Imbalance. Like, it's the Bender non-Bender conflict. We saw it at the start. Li Ling here has kind of amplified it in Imbalance, and it's going to, be resolved with, the proper defeat of Li Ling and her family. And we'll have to leave things in a way where, like, I suppose the team is going to have to monitor what's happening in Cranefish Town. We'll see exactly how they go about resolving that, but we know it doesn't get fully fixed here, so there's only so much they can do. And so because of that, the book can't really have the I suppose, strength of conclusion that you maybe would want it to. So, to me, you have to focus on the stories where the comics are telling a fully new story. And for me, Azula. The Azula is the story to tell in the comics in terms of something where we have no clue what happens next. There's a great setup in place already. All the pieces are sort of right there in position. You just have to activate that story and commit to it. And if you go for the Fire Nation story with the Avatar comics next, then I think you have a lot to do. Reunite Mei and Zuko, finally have those two get back together. I think that would make a lot of fans happy. which in a way I think is what you need to do with some of these comics, is just deliver on those moments that the fans want to see in the comics, and not feel that like you have to do all this like really subtle world building to set up every single step upon the way to Republic City, even though it's going to be years before we get anywhere near actual Republic City. So, you know, tell those bigger things that have meaning to the fans. Have Aang find the other sky bisons and lemurs. Have Zuko, you know, hatch that dragon egg and get drunk. That's going to be super fun to see those kind of long-term storytelling things of like Aang gradually, you know, with the air acolytes kind of reforming, like reclaiming the air temples, just his reaction to the animals coming back, Appa's reaction to like seeing other sky bison, and then Zuko with a baby dragon is an amazing subplot that you could have going on. Like, you have him reunited with Mai, you have him with his little sister Ki, Azula, potentially if you commit to that story, Azula in a very different position, and a baby dragon there in play. You have so much going on that would just add so much fun to that side of the story. Just to kind of cover those little bits and pieces. Also, you have stuff like the Red Lotus going on in the background as well. Like that's going to have to be set up at some point, I assume, in the comics, because like we know it's in place for a decent amount of time for like the leader of the Red Lotus to split from the Order of the White Lotus and have a place in the spirit world named after him, and then get to the point where like Unalaq is eventually like the leader of the Red Lotus, and then Zahir. So, you know, you have to present a history to them, which means that sooner rather than later, you probably want to get the Order of White Lotus involved in the story and stuff like that, because I think a lot of people have been bringing up stuff like Boomy. I think Boomy should come back into the story at some point as well, because, you know, he's like one of Aang's only connections to, you know, I suppose the era he is originally from, in a way. So, you know, if they ever dealt with like the death of Boomy, that's a big topic. That is a huge thing for Aang to like suddenly be like, you know, everyone's gone. There's like a minor connection with Guru Patik, but you know, Aang only knows Guru Patik from right now. So Boomy is that one connection he has to someone he actually knew from before the ice. And so there's a lot of meaning to that. And then they could get into some of the whole Omashu stuff and so on, and that would be just really, really fun to do. Just cover more stuff with Boomy. I don't think you necessarily have to commit to like killing him off straight away, but you know, I think bring him back into the story, bring the Order of the White Lotus back in, and start to set up some stuff. I think, because I suppose the reasoning behind a lot of that would be the world can't go through a period where the Avatar is just like missing like that again, just gone. No one knows what's up with the Avatar until, you know, randomly found by two kids in the Southern Water Tribe. So that's, I suppose, why the Order of White Lotus get involved to in a more organized way, monitor the Avatar, deal with the finding of the next Avatar, and so on. So you have to set that up at some point. But yeah, it's the Azula story, I think, is the one you have to go for. Now, ultimately, that is committing to telling a story where you're focusing more on a character arc than any sort of world-building arc as such, whereas I think more recently they've wanted to do the world-building stuff. But to me, the position that Azula is in by the end of Smoke and Shadow, it makes complete sense for the plot to be Azula. She's there, you know, to be a menace in the Fire Nation, to cause these issues, to force Zuko to be the type of Fire Lord she thinks he needs to be. She wants the Fire Lord to be, and she doesn't understand why Zuko wouldn't want to do that, why Zuko wants to do things differently. That is the conflict I think you have to deal with. You have to eventually get to Azula and Ursa talking, get to the point where Azula realizes why, you know, why Mai and Ty Lee are important to her, basically the true meaning of friendship in a way, and learns to deal with people in a way that's not controlling them. And, you know, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to commit to just Azula goes 180 and is now this completely different character. You can smooth her out as a character, give her a little bit of a new angle while still keeping her roughly the same way that she is. Like, I think, yes, I agree with the idea that it would be wrong to completely, I suppose, like, defang Azula. Like, you have to keep her, at least to some extent, cold, calculating, and even a little bit cruel. You have to keep that because that is who she is, but give her some of the other side of things as well, because part of the idea of her character is that she literally doesn't know any of that because she was never taught it. That's what like the beach got across to us, that she just doesn't know how to really interact with people. That's not controlling him through fear or anything like that. It's not all about power. So, her learning that would be very, very interesting, and would make her so much more interesting going forward than just having her be constantly the villain at every stage until at some point in the future she dies. I think they would have brought it up if like Azula was just a villain her entire life. So I think at some point the idea is that something happens and you get her out of just she is obviously the villain, and can have her as just the character who kind of in a way supports the good side now, but is the one who maybe suggests the harsher options, which is the advisor that Zuko needs, but ultimately Zuko is the one making the decisions. He may sometimes realize that a harsher decision is needed, and that's why Azula would help. I think that is the setup that they have right there of Azula will become Zuko's advisor, because I think Zuko will probably admit about himself that one of his flaws is that at this point, like, he can't bring himself to make those harsh decisions because he kind of doesn't trust himself if he has to make decisions that harsh. So Azula kind of helping him to make harsh decisions kind of would be an important thing. But to get her to that position, I think you have to even her out. She can't be the wild card that she is right now and be in that position. So that's the importance of that. Beyond that, I don't really know what you'd actually go about doing with the next book. I don't think you can just do a direct continuation of like Imbalance. Like I think people will just get tired of this like vague dealing with the whole bender non-bender thing, knowing that it still is an issue all the way into Korra and doesn't really get resolved until I suppose effectively the election of Raiko sort of evens things out for the most part. So I don't think you can necessarily just do that. At that point, I think what you have to do is I think there's a few things you need to resolve right now, and then we're talking about time skip realistically. I think you do need to commit to a bigger time skip going forward. We kind of had one, but they were vague about it here in that it's roughly a year that's passed, but it's very unclear. Even bigger than that, get to the point where like all of our characters are 18. So the youngest characters are Aang and Toph. Get to the point where both of them are 18 and you can tell more meaningful stories with all the characters as adults now. That's what I want to see the proper progress, to really move us away from just sort of wrapping stuff up from the end of the series into truly we're in like a new era for the characters basically. And then at that point, like I've been saying a lot of times before, I think if you're not going to commit to a huge, time skip, then what you need to do is, I think, split up Team Avatar. You need to, at the end of this story, commit to, like, Aang and Katara are going to, like, stay here near Cranefish Town to monitor this situation. Aang realizes he needs to be here, and Katara, wants to stay with Aang, of course. Because the setup is obviously that they're so close that they don't want to be apart anymore, and I think Katara would absolutely be willing to help Aang in this situation because, again, going back to the promise, she was the one who set up the idea of, like, maybe it's a good idea to have, like, a nation of nations kind of type thing. So I think that's what you need to do, in addition to what I felt has been needed for a while of, like, Aang having a home, effectively, a place that is a base of operations, and he's not just traveling all around the place every single opportunity, which means I think you need to have Sokka go off on his own. I think Toph, they've all but I think confirmed that like she will be, I think, probably separating from the group for a little bit to train to get to Chief of Police Toph, and I suppose maybe reorganize her metal bending school into being the metal bending police officer academy type thing. However, I assume something at the end of Imbalance will get us towards that, and it'll be a direction Toph really knows that she wants to go in, and things will happen with regards to that. Sokka and I think Suki's probably should kind of go off on their own to do stuff, whether that be like them going back to Kyoshi Island or her going with Sokka back to the south, because I think Sokka of all the characters is the one most in need of a more serious arc focused on him, to the point where I'd be like, if the next comic is literally just like Sokka's the main character and like Suki's there the entire journey, like sign me up. I don't think you need to necessarily have a huge focus on Aang or Zuko in your book. Let Sokka as one of the other main characters stand out, if you absolutely need to. Maybe have a side plot that involves Aang. And you know what I think the perfect side plot is? That doesn't need like a ton of page count, but is nice and emotional. It is Aang finding the other Sky Bison. That's just a little thing you can do as a side plot that's kind of very fun, doesn't take up too much time, gives us something we wanted for a while the focus is on Sokka and Suki. Because like Sokka needs to become a leader. We need to see more of that development into a leader. They still are focusing too much on his comedic side and not the fact that we know about Sokka. He gets to be the southern representative on the council in Republic City. He's the chief of the tribe at some point. Show us getting there to that point, because I don't think he's quite there yet. Similarly, I think Suki being around for like a full book instead of more of like just kind of cameo appearance, like special guest, like she almost is treated as most of the time. I want to see her become a more regular addition and kind of get to see more of her go through her own arc and stuff like that. Really be she is part of the team. And get towards like answering those questions of like, how do we not know if Sokka has like a family or children, or if he gets married or not at any point? Those sort of questions that everyone in the fandom, like those are the questions that the entire fandom asks, not just the hardcore fans, but everyone asks. On my most popular videos on my channel, the 2 videos where I cover the family trees of all the characters, everyone, like they're probably like 2 of my only videos that have really like reached a huge audience. So like any Avatar fan, basically everyone asked about Sokka and how we don't know anything about his backstory, about his like future, I suppose, and how we don't know if he has kids or not. It's incredible just how many comments I get like every week about that on those videos. That is one of those questions where if you confirmed it, that's a huge thing to confirm. I know they'll probably wait a bit, but I think it's also important to discuss what's next for Korra Comics, because I think they've got a really, really good creative team. I think Mike and Michelle Wong is like perfect going forward for Korra Comics. I think again it seems fairly obvious that what they should do is finally do that Fire Nation arc. Cover that stuff, let us know Izumi a bit more, let us finally meet this daughter that Izumi has, the princess of the Fire Nation. Bring Iroh back into things a little bit more if you absolutely have to. It allows maybe Zuko to be a big part of the story again. Maybe you can feature the Zuko going to the spirit world to find Iroh thing. Just the setup stuff from Korra that we didn't get, that we really, really want to see. I want to see what the Fire Nation is like in Korra, to see how it has changed over the years, because it's obviously like right now in the comics it's this like sudden change of the Fire Nation post-war. Now I'd love to see it like obviously like 70 plus years on, and what it's like now, given that the war's been over for a long time and there's a new Fire Lord in place now, but Zuko's still around, and how things have changed. Obviously the problem there is, I suppose, finding a plot reason to go there, but you just come up with something. I think you just need to get them there. I think this is your opportunity to give Mako some focus. By all means bring Bolin along if you have to, but I think some speculation is that he might have a very important role at the end of Ruins of the Empire, if they go in the Bolin into politics role that I think many think he's going into. But the other thing on the table for like Mako and Bolin is that we saw them connect with the Earth Kingdom side of their family in Korra Book 3 and also 4. What about the Fire Nation side of their family, their mother? I would love to see them go down that side of things and find out about Naoki, who's their mother, find out about her family, where they're from, and especially for Mako, I think that would be a very nice thing to do, to really, really have that connection and go there. So I'd love to see that happen. I think it literally is just finding a way, a reason for the characters to not be in Republic City, to go there. But I think they can find a way. I think probably what they should stay away from for a little while is having a book that is too focused on Republic City. Because I think Turf Wars kind of left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths with just like, wow, just hanging around the city and doing stuff that naturally pops up in the city is not really all that interesting. And similarly, I think 2 books in a row have focused quite heavily on politics, elections. So you'd want to, if you're going to do something like that, make sure you're not talking about elections coming up next. If it's politics, make sure it's something interesting within the Fire Nation and politics that you're covering. But I think that's what you have to do. That, or finally commit to Korra trying to make some progress on dealing with the human spirit conflict and just what's going on there. Because Turf Wars basically did nothing with it. It's just like, here's a minor conflict, Korra resolved it, fine. Properly making headway into that and exploring it. And I think that's going to involve bringing a lot of spirit characters back. Like, not just having this random dragon eel spirit speak for the entire spirits. Bring back some spirits that we know that can talk and, get them involved in things. And I think what the characters I'm talking about are like Ai, if at all possible. I think that would be a good character to bring back. Wan Shi Tong. All those type of more notable spirits who can speak, to get back involved in things. That actually, I suppose, could be a good way to connect things. Like maybe some spirits, maybe some spirit stuff is happening in the Fire Nation. Like suddenly, a lot of spirits have come to the Fire Nation, and you could do something like the Fire Nation is like the least spiritual nation is because of the war and what was happening. And now people are struggling to deal with them, and it be as fluid of a connection as it's been in like other nations. They need Korra to go there to help people learn about the spirits or something like that. I think that's a good reason to get everyone to go and just deal with things. So there's definitely some options to go with. So I definitely like that idea. Anything else obvious with Korra? Like if you're committing to doing a full on like Suyin Kuvira thing here, I don't think you'd want to go for that again. Similarly, I really don't think they're going to do all that much with Zahir. We're definitely not going to get any sort of an arc, I think, focusing on Zahir. We may see him again here and there with stuff, but I don't think we'll see much focus. Beyond that, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, Fire Nation, and then Korra long-term goals of solving the problem with the spirits. Korra really can go anywhere. Like, it's so open as to where they can go and that sort of thing. After that point, I think you're probably more, I think, talking about maybe bringing in some of the other characters, like focusing in on some of the air kids, like making Jinora maybe the focus of the story. Iki, Milo. I'd actually like to see some focus on Rohan. I'd like to see them confirm if he's an airbender or not at some point, even if it's just a minor kind of plot point, kind of like they did with Ki becoming a firebender. I'd like to see something similar done with Rohan to sort of just get that confirmation out of the way and see what's happening with that. Kai, of course, I'd like to see more of Kai, more of Opal, just some of the more minor characters that we haven't got as much of a time with or focus on. I think there's a lot of option to go with on that front. But yeah, there is other stuff they can do. But I think those are the main options with Korra. And then yeah, I think I'd love to see, of course, them announce more comics, and just like, to me, like, the more content the better once it's all pretty good quality. But I think with the future of like the books looking pretty good, the comics, it really is all about what idea they commit to coming up next. I think the Avatar comics need to deliver with their next book, and from the get-go have people excited, whereas I think the announcement of Imbalance immediately had people kind of being like, half of the people were like, yes, finally we're getting this exploration. Everyone else kind of like, I don't think they can do this well enough right now that it's going to be that amazing. So they need to do something that I think really blows people away. And for me, I think the Azula story is your next The Search. the next comic that really gets people talking if they commit to that Azula story in the way that they should. And I think the potential is all there. I think they can get it right. As for, I suppose, the other two books, the Inside Editions books, An Avatar's Chronicle, the Legend of Korra one, and then Legacy of the Fire Nation for next year. I have basically next to no hopes of any real new information coming out of An Avatar's Chronicle, and I have higher hopes for the Legacy of the Fire Nation after the preview, because I think there'll at least be some hints towards some stuff. Even if it's maybe not the full details that we want, I think there's no way they can get through that book without alluding to some of the stuff that we at least want to know about. So I think they'll get some of it right there. Beyond that, I suppose it's just like pretty much anything else they announce is going to be cool. But I think the biggest thing that's going to be like a signal about where we're going is the next Avatar comic. And I assume that will be announced as like the big Avatar news article thing that we've got the last few years, just before Comic-Con. That's the way it's tended to happen the last few years, is that if there's an Avatar announcement coming, they've done it like the week before New York Comic-Con to kind of get it out of the way and announce it. But that all depends on the creative team. I want Faith Aaron Hicks and Peter Wortman to stay on board. I think Faith Aaron Hicks will stay on board for sure. Peter Wortman, I'm not sure. So, the artist change is probably going to be the biggest thing about, like, I suppose, timing when we get the book. But ultimately, I would say that the writing of Faith Aaron Hicks is so good, I really do want her to stay. The final thing I want to talk about, though, is it's kind of a fear, ultimately, for me, because of my opinion on the overall subject, and that is, will the production increasing on the Netflix live-action Avatar show any effect on the other media? And what I mean by that is, of course, Mike and Brian are heavily, heavily involved. They are the producers, the showrunners, basically, I think is the specific term, on the Netflix live-action thing. So they're pretty much involved in everything on that to make sure it is as best as it can be. You all know from my previous videos on the subject that I'm really ultimately not at all interested in the Netflix live-action show. I just don't really care about it. I think it's kind of a waste of time. I don't really get why they're doing it, and I don't get what it's going to accomplish. So for me, I tend to have a very negative outlook on it, in that I really hope it doesn't affect the comics. I hope it doesn't affect the books or the novels or anything like that. That if we get a slowdown on books basically just because they're working on that show, I think that is a terrible move. To basically slow down new content to retell, to do the same story in a different medium, I think that's just kind of shocking. Now, given that they have been working on the show for the last while and the comics haven't shown any change, especially with Mike writing, I don't think there's that much reason to believe if there will be a slowdown, but at the same time, they haven't really ramped up into full production yet, to the point where I think Mike and Brian will be at their busiest. So there's still time, I think, for that to potentially happen. I really hope it doesn't, and that's going to create a big problem if it does. But it is a fear that I think is important to talk about, because I think a lot of people who are excited about it, who also like the comics and stuff like that, are maybe, thinking it'll just happen by default, when, no, we kind of need Mike and Brian to make the other stuff happen as well. Just because, like, they seem to like to have their hand involved in everything to make sure it's all canon and all works and so on. So, and especially now with the novels and, stuff like that, I'd hate to see it where it's just like the novels start and then are immediately sort of put on hold because Mike is busy on the live action show, or the comics have to stop for a while because, especially the Korra comics, have to stop completely because Mike is working on the show. So it's stuff like that I think is kind of like, at that point you're kind of asking, like, how do you not then have another person there who can sort of just be that position on other media, in the same way, who knows like the idea of the stories you want to tell and can, you know, guide it in that direction. Like, you know, if Mike and Brian want to work on those other projects, I think you kind of have to have someone then to keep the main projects going, your comics and your books and stuff like that. But that's just probably me being a little bit overly negative about probably what will happen. Nothing yet points towards that happening, but it is a fear, and you'll know, I'll definitely be talking about it if we get any confirmation that there will be slowdown on stuff because of the Netflix live action. So, yeah, that's the video. That's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. I haven't done a lot of Avatar videos of late just because there hasn't been a lot to talk about. So I did want to discuss my thoughts on the future of stuff going forward here in this video. So, you know, it was a bit all over the place, but I think people tend to like this sort of speculation about what's coming up next as we enter a period of, like, bunch of new books. Then we'll be waiting for those announcements. So, yeah. I think we'll be doing a podcast this weekend. We'll just be going over some of the pieces of news that have come out over the last while. We might do a little bit of speculation along these lines as well on it. And then, it's pretty much just, I'm waiting for my review copy of Unbalanced Part 3 to come in, so within the next week or two, I could have an early review up on my channel for Unbalanced Part 3. And then we're into Rise of Kyoshi hype with the release of the book, and hopefully I'll be able to get that one maybe early, maybe a review copy. I don't really know. That one hasn't gone up for request. I don't know if it will. So I'll kind of be relying on the place I order from to maybe ship it out early. So either way, you'll have tons of content from me on that. With the Rise of Kyoshi book, I am planning on doing like typical like non-spoiler review, spoiler review, and then kind of like basically book club style thing of like, we'll discuss the first 3 chapters in this video, the next 3 chapters and so on, and really take a deep dive into the book that way. So I think people will like that chapter by chapter analysis that I'm planning on doing for that book. Yeah, that's been the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. What are your thoughts on where they'll go with the next couple of stories? Do you think the books will continue? What direction do you think they'll take after Kyoshi? And then most importantly, in my opinion, what will be the next stories for the Avatar comics and the Korra comics? And what were your thoughts on what I had to say here? But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.